Here we are for real ass cinema with Ethan Griggs. Boy, the blackest thing that's white. And here in this episode of Real Ass Cinema, we're going to discuss Damien Chazelle's Babylon. It's a 2022 film that is it's definitely something. We're going to get into that real quick to see. Definitely feel free to chime in on anything I say because it's just usual stuff from your favorite cinema asshole. So the chat seems to be disabled. I want to at least get it going. You know how to do that. Anyways, so Damien Chazelle's Babylon came out in 2022. And at the time that this movie came out, a lot of motherfuckers shit on it. They didn't really give a fuck about it because one, they didn't know shit about the cinema history that this film discusses. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to dissect about this film. Babylon. It's a film that takes place it starts out in 1926 and goes all the way to like 1933. But really, it also ends in like 1952. So, still trying to find a way to get this chat to not be disabled because I want to hear from all of y'all. If anybody's watching this shit, I doubt anybody is, but I do want it to be open to discussion because I also want to know what you people think out there. Let's see. This still disabled. I don't know. Whatever. If you can comment and I see something, feel free. Because like I said, I want this to be more of an open discussion. I don't know shit about technology, and I'm trying to use this shit. So let's just dive right on into Babylon. I mean, this movie is, when I saw it in theaters, I was blown away by it because one, I know cinema history, and there's a lot of composites in this film, and of course, Damien Chazelle is not a director that I'm fully familiar with. I mean, I've kind of seen Whiplash, but I fell asleep through most of it. Not to say that it's a shitty movie. I fall asleep through a lot of movies because I watch shit when I'm tired and I don't usually want to go back to it. I didn't even attempt to fucking watch La La Land because what the hell do I need to see Ryan Gosling teach black people about jazz for? And I didn't see First Man either. Ryan Gosling playing Neil Armstrong and stuff. But I did see Babylon because one, I'm a big fan of the actors in it. I mean, fuck, you got Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie, who are also in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that came out a few years before, and that is definitely one film that Babylon does kind of take a lot of shit from, because when you look at Brad Pitt's character, he plays Jack Conrad, which is sort of a composite for John Gilbert, who was a big silent film star who was in the King Vidor's The Big Parade, which was a big hit. That movie was such a big hit that King Vidor was able to do whatever the fuck that he wanted to do. He went on to do, he followed up that movie with like one of the great like art house movies of the silent film era, The Crowd. So the epitome of doing one for them and one for yourself, because if you make a studio a lot of money, then whatever the fuck you do next, they don't care what you do. You do whatever you want to do, and that is ultimately the goal of all that. You want to be able to make whatever films you want to make, and of course you got in this character that Brad Pitt is playing, he's now playing the sensitive actor who is dealing with being irrelevant, the same way that Leonardo DiCaprio played that same kind of actor in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Because, Brad Pitt goes from playing probably the coolest character that Tarantino ever gave him since fucking Aldo Rain, and to playing like one of the like kind of saddest characters that he's ever played. Because like, of course, you'll wonder why more Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie. They're the only motherfuckers that are in the Hollywood shit now that actually look like movie stars used to look, because that's the thing, is what people kind of forget about Hollywood is it's a dream factory. There's not nobody goes to the movies to see gritty realism. At least I don't. It's getting to the point now where it's like everybody just wants to see themselves projected on the screen, and it's like nobody gives a fuck. We want to see beautiful people doing outlandish shit, and this is definitely what you get with Babylon. Because I mean, if anybody's familiar with Hollywood at that time, the shit was fucking crazy, man. It's like nobody knows how to party like Hollywood, and nobody knows how to party like Hollywood back then. And I feel like the film probably turned a lot of people off. And one, I don't know how they got away with all that shit. This movie got slapped with an R rating, and it's like got some wild stuff in it. I mean, it's the basically an orgy going on in the beginning of the film. Well, technically the beginning of the film, that elephant that they're trying to move, and it's shitting all over the place. But the thing about Babylon is, watching it again, I'm like, it's the more I watch it, the more I realize, how hack it is. And the thing about it is, a lot of hacks can like be good. They have moments of brilliance, but a lot of this shit, not just Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that they steal from. Because of course you also got Margot Robbie. She's basically playing the female version of Dirk Diggler, which is the character Mark Wahlberg plays in Boogie Nights. This movie steals a lot of shit from Boogie Nights. So much shit that like Paul Thomas Anderson should be suing somebody, because like there's at least 3 blatant incidents in this film that are like lifted directly from fucking Boogie Nights. Because one thing about the 3 films, Boogie Nights, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Babylon have in common is they're all 3 about a transitional period in cinema. Of course, Boogie Nights was about that transitional period in pornography from the golden age, what can be considered the golden age of pornography in the 70s, where, it wasn't just about, just tits and ass. You actually had a story involved in movies like Deep Throat, The Devil and Mrs. Jones, and Behind the Green Door. There was a certain artistic merit, that that thin line between art and pornography, or is pornography art? Some may argue pornography is art, but at that same time, there's then it transitions in the 80s to video, and the art aspect kind of goes away for more of a mass production. The same thing in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's a big transitional period in Hollywood where you go from the Eisenhower era of the 50s, the clean cut pomade having motherfuckers that were the heroes, to the fucking counterculture hippie anti-heroes that would gain prominence in the late 60s and all the way through the 70s. And at a time where like nobody knew what was popular. They didn't know why it was popular. They just knew that the shit was making money. And now you look at Babylon, it's dealing with the first like big transitional period in Hollywood, going from silent films to sound films. And of course, the one that kicked that off was Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. And as soon as like they're hearing Al Jolson with Swanee, they audiences ate that shit up, and of course everybody because silent films for almost 30 years that were like a big deal. Everybody loved, they were perfectly fine with movies being silent, but as soon as they knew what they were missing, it's a big fucking shakeup. Now, what Babylon does brilliantly is it does capture like that whole upset, and it does it in a way that is almost heartbreaking, and like I said, they've got a lot of other composites like Lee Jun Lee plays basically two different actors, and most specifically Anna May Wong, who was like the first Chinese actress in Hollywood, and you definitely see that, as well as Marlene Dietrich, because they have the lesbian element as well. And of course, Marlene Dietrich was a huge dyke in Hollywood, and that sequence where her character Lady Faye is singing "My Girl's Pussy" type thing, and kind of dressed very masculine in the way that Marlene Dietrich was dressed a lot of times. And like it's done like a lot of these are stuff like you see the beginning, you see that fat dude getting pissed on by that very young chick. That's clearly a reference to Fatty Arbuckle, who was the first comedian to ever be canceled. And people want to talk about cancel culture being a new thing. That was over 100 years ago. First comedian to get canceled, because the Fatty Arbuckle was like one of like the most beloved comedian. Everybody loved Fatty Arbuckle until that girl OD'd, and you couldn't play a Fatty Arbuckle movie in theaters, otherwise the Bible thumpers would burn it down. But lest we forget, cancel culture used to be a thing that the right wing did. Now the left wing stole it. And like I said, nothing's original these days. It's fucking ridiculous. Talking about nothing being original, look at Damien Chazelle, right? At least three instances. I could probably find a few more where he steals from Boogie Nights. The first one being when Brad Pitt's character kills himself. Of course, he's, one, dealing with being irrelevant, because when they finally make that transition to sound, his stuff becomes laughable because now he's too old to really be a romantic lead, and he doesn't know how to emote. Now, one thing too, it's amazing to me how like one film can cover a period and all of a sudden it's gospel. That's how it is. Singing in the Rain, which is referenced a lot in Babylon, that has that whole thing of like all the reason why a lot of silent actors weren't successful in talkies were because they're right sound like this. Some of them, yes, but that wasn't the whole thing. Louise Brooks, who played the brilliant Lulu in G.W. Papp's phenomenal picture, Pandora's Box, she talked about how most actors from the silent era weren't successful in talking pictures because they actually had to remember lines. Most of them were drunks or junkies, and they couldn't remember shit to save their lives. So it's like when you had to be on time and remember shit, it was a whole new ball game of shit. And so now, and that they do deal with that to a certain extent. We see Margot Robbie's character, Nellie Leroy, struggling to remember lines and stuff, and also having to deal with being in a contained soundstage. One of the most brilliant sequences in this film is when you kind of see the assembly line nature of how silent films were. You know, you're out in a like an open field somewhere, and you just got little makeshift rooms set up, and each one's doing a different film. You know, you're not confined to a soundstage where everything has to be quiet and all this stuff. And that's another thing they lift from Boogie Nights when they finally make the transition to sound and they're going through all that. That's another, like, the thing about it is the difference between Paul Thomas Anderson and Damien Chazelle is Paul Thomas Anderson's a little more refined, you know, whereas like Chazelle kind of like, let's make it a little more frantic so people don't think I'm ripping people off, you know, so I'm just fucking, you know, ADHD cinema, you know. But the thing of it is like I said, in the Brad Pitt suicide thing, Jack Conrad goes and kills himself. That whole, the tracking shots, everything, that's the same way William H. Macy kills himself in Boogie Nights. Also, the other one too, everything. Well, I'll come back to that later, but you know, there's a lot. I mean, the cast is fucking brilliant. The thing about Babylon is there's moments of brilliance to it that can't be denied. And I find it funny how, like, when people first saw this movie, they shit on it. And like now, years later, that, you know, it's probably popping up on like Netflix and it's on Paramount Plus, people will be watching it and they're like, oh, this is kind of a brilliant movie, man. And they talk it up, but like you can't really like, you can't praise it too much because, like I said, it's a movie that also doesn't know what the fuck it is. That's the other thing. That sequence at the near the end of the film where, like, you know, Nellie Leroy, she's got a bunch of gambling debts. She's Manny, probably the most tragic character in this film because, you know, dude not only like sells out his heritage to be in Hollywood, and he gets kind of lured in. That whole sequence, the drug dealing sequence with Toby Maguire, that's fucking Boogie Nights too. Because, like, you know, but they're giving them fucking fake cocaine, they show up with fucking fake money. Now, does add a bit of a layer because that whole descent into what can only really be described as hell. You know, they go through all these levels and it's just debauchery at its highest. You know, it's like almost like we can't do enough to make this crazy. We're going to keep adding layers and layers to it. Now, some of this shit could have really happened. I mean, LA has always been a fucking just cesspool of degenerates, and each level, you know, may seem worse than the last, but that whole unregulated just debauchery before William Hayes came in with his code to kind of clean up the town, so to speak. And this is all film history. You can look this shit up, you know, find it anywhere, whatever you want to do. And the other things, like, I mean, the cinematography too has that old school feel of what a Paramount movie would have been in the 70s, tackling this kind of story. Most specifically, Ken Russell's Valentino, about the great silent star Rudolph Valentino, who, like, you know, women killed themselves the day that man died, and hung like a horse apparently, and the only person who tried to like consummate a lavender marriage, which is interesting in and of itself. And of course, like I said, Margot Robbie's character, Nellie Leroy is a kind of a composite of Clara Bow, who allegedly like banged the whole USC football team, and we see that in this film as well. Eric Roberts, who is a very underrated actor. I mean, his career, if you don't know the career of Eric Roberts, definitely check it out. He's the brother of Julia Roberts and the father of Emma Roberts. But more importantly, he's one of the greatest actors to come out of the 1980s and just had like a whole run from King of the Gypsies to Star 80 to the Pope of Greenwich Village and a few others that, you know, like you discover a new Eric Roberts film and it's just a gem to watch. But he plays Nellie Leroy's father, and you know, he's just even sadder. You know, that's another moment from Boogie Nights when Margot Robbie's on her first film set, her first film role. She's having to cry on cue, and she does it several different times. You know, time she does it, then it's like, which way you want me to do it next? That's straight out of Boogie Nights when you know, they didn't get the cum shot. And it's like, oh, I can do it again if you want, you know. It's fucking, like I said, there is, you know, you make the argument everybody that does movies steals from somebody. You know, that is the way it is. You borrow whatever the fuck. But and I would say that Chazelle covers it up enough for people that don't know shit to just gloss over. But real ass motherfuckers like me that know the cinema, like they're gonna pick up on this shit. Especially somebody that's a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan. Like, I mean, this mother on his best day could not be half the filmmaker that Paul Thomas Anderson is. Most specifically, that cop out of an ending. You know, because of course, Diego Calva, who plays Manny, he definitely like the epitome of that dreamer that just wants to be in Hollywood. He wants to be on a film set. He wants to be being a part of something that's bigger than himself and all that shit. We see him just swoon over Margot Robbie, and of course, who wouldn't? It is Margot Robbie, and also her, like one of the many women in Hollywood that look like her. Samara Weaving is in this, as well as Constance Moore, who's kind of like her rival in a sense, you know. And we also have, you know, Manny gets into this shit, goes from being a driver, a handler. We see him breaking up a strike, you know, having to go get a camera when one gets busted down. Yeah, Spike Jonze playing a German or Austrian filmmaker that can, from my knowledge, can only be either a representation of Joseph von Sternberg or Erich von Stroheim. You know, two angry Austrian fucks that made some of the greatest silent films of all time. Of course, I would probably say it's more Joseph von Sternberg, but it could be Stroheim. I don't really see Stroheim though doing a big battle epic. The Sternberg, on the other hand, probably would. You know, Sternberg was the guy that discovered Marlene Dietrich, and of course, the Blue Angel. And all they also did, they did a string of films together in Hollywood, like Shanghai Express, Morocco. And if you're not familiar with Joseph von Sternberg, definitely check him out. You know, from his silent film, he's one of those rare directors that worked in silent and sound film. And Spike Jonze actually played, and Flea is in this movie too, playing a very serious role. Not nothing that you would expect from Flea. I mean, when you think of like movies that Flea's been in, you know, he was one of the nihilists in The Big Lebowski. And where you know who Flea is, he's the I believe the bassist for the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And Jeff Garlin is in as well. He's playing a studio executive. One actual person that they have in this film, Max Minghella plays Irving Thalberg. And if you don't know who Irving Thalberg is, that dude was a fucking wonder kid. Like, he died really young. I believe his late 20s, early 30s. He was real young. He was one of the worked at MGM with Louis B. Mayer. When that man died, it shut down that whole fucking town because and he basically just died from exhaustion. It wasn't like drugs or alcohol or anything like that. Like this motherfucker, like morning, day, and night, he was constantly he could come up with a film concept like that. And you don't see him much in this film, but Max Minghella, dude, of course, most notable for playing the lead in Terry Zweigoff's Art School Confidential. He does it absolutely brilliantly, in my opinion. This is not I mean, you could make a movie about Thalberg alone, and if I'm not mistaken, that might be who Robert De Niro's character in The Last Tycoon is based off of. And we see that one, and there are a few other ones. Like I said, there's more references to shit than actual people. Like Gene Smart, who plays the character um, Eleanor St. John. That is based off of a film columnist named Luella Parsons, who most famously had a feud with Hedda Hopper, who was basically the new Luella Parsons. The Hedda Hopper, of course, like she had her run in the 50s where, she exposed a lot of film people. Film criticism is, and I don't even know if you can call what like Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper did is film criticism. They were more gossip columnists than anything else. They were more kind of an equivalent to what Danny DeVito's character in LA Confidential is, just always looking for that juicy the bit of information about, like, who's gay in Hollywood or who's doing drugs, who's a junkie, whatever the fuck. And they just didn't serve much of a purpose other than to either build careers or tear them down. And it's a brilliant exchange between Gene Smart and Brad Pitt in the film, because he's like she had just did a story on him that, is Jack Conrad through. And he's asking her, like, well, what's the deal? Why are you trashing me in this? And he's basically calling them cockroaches. And when she says that line, why do you think cockroaches survive a house fire? Because they realize that the house doesn't need them. Whereas, everything that gets consumed, they just assume the house needs them. And, it's heavy shit, because you will about, the gossip columnists always survive. There's certain types of actors and entertainers that don't survive. Gossip columnists have never died. I mean, look at TMZ. That shit is fucking crazy. That shit's one of the most popular television programs. And all that is that fucking paparazzo shit that Fellini kind of exposes in La Dolce Vita. It's very parasitic. Much like, cockroaches aren't really parasitic, but they're relentless and they don't give a fuck. Suppose about halfway through this, we go at least an hour. I still don't know how to disable or to enable the chat. Since chat is disabled for this live stream, I guess I haven't garnered enough views or something. but who knows? It's other actors in this film though. Tobey Maguire, who is also executive producer on this film. You know, he's all fucking crazy in this shit too. And Javon Adepo, who plays a jazz musician named Sidney Palmer. One of the more heartbreaking moments in this film is when they make him go in, I guess you call blacker face. And because they're filming, you know, Manny has this idea, oh, we could do a movie about, you know, black jazz musicians and stuff. They're filming them, and apparently all the other musicians are like way darker than him. And it's like, well, we got to make it look more uniform. Otherwise, in the South, they're going to think it's a mixed race thing, and we can't book the South. So they make him do that whole blackface stuff, shoe polish or whatever the fuck they use, fucking crazy shit. He does it once, and he says, "Fuck it," because this man has standards. This is one of the only characters in this film that actually had like standards and dignity, you know, because he did it basically so the rest of the cast and crew could get paid. And then once he did it, he booked it to jam your car in your house up your ass. And he's just playing real music. You see him the whole movie, you know, berating his other bandmates because they don't play good enough. You know, this dude's clearly passionate about movies, or not passionate about music. And one thing that's an interesting sequence is a William Randolph Hearst party that they go to. You know, you got Margot Robbie's character trying to be more sophisticated than she is, because of course, like, she had this like wild that character has this wild like New Jersey accent, and they're trying to like get her clear of that shit because, you know, it kind of turns off the audience to make her sound more sophisticated. Yet again, similar to Singing in the Rain bullshit, you know, because granted, that was one the reason why a lot of silent stars weren't successful in talking pictures, is because their voice didn't match what they look like. Now, it's funny though, nobody else talks about anything else. To assume, oh, that's the only thing. Like I said, like Louise Brooks said, a lot of these motherfuckers were drunks or junkies, and they couldn't remember their lines because they were too fucked up. And also, one thing nobody talks about is it is a different kind of acting. The pantomime is not. The pantomime is a lot easier to do than to actually emote with like words when you're actually dealing with sound as well, you know. And of course, some directors could make the transition because, you know, a lot of them saw it as a challenge. Somebody like Charlie Chaplin, he's still doing silent films even in the 30s, where most of shit went to the sound. Now, the two films that Chaplin did in the 30s that were still technically silent films, City Lights, Modern Times, could be more considered hybrids, because there are sounds in them. And he does, I think he sings in I believe he sings in Modern Times. Off the top of my head, I can't remember which one he sings in, but he sings in one of them. Of course, his first talking picture was in 1940 with a movie called The Great Dictator, where he basically, you know, throws shots at Hitler for stealing his mustache. But back to Babylon, though. I mean, like I said, there's so many layers of history. And what irks me the most, though, is the ending. Because, you know, the movie's, it's an epic movie. I'm not one to shit on a movie because it's 3 hours, or at least 3 hours. The movie runs slightly over 3 hours because it covers a lot of history. It covers near a decade, probably the most like tumultuous and like revolutionary period in cinema. There's a few other ones that usually happens every about 30 years that the cinema has like a reawakening. So about this time, the next one wasn't really until 1967, where you started getting films like Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, The Dirty Dozen, that really like, and even Point Blank, movies that push the boundaries of what you could do and say in the cinema, stuff you could show. Because the Hays Code went into effect in 1933, and they didn't repeal it. They didn't change that shit until 1967. So it was like, what you don't know what the Hays Code was. It was a sort of backdoor censorship for the movies. It's like William Hayes, who's like the postmaster general at the time. They brought him in to be the movie czar, so to speak, and he was there to clean up Hollywood and all that shit. And he basically had like this set things that you could say and do in movies. Shit, you could, like, even if it was a married couple, you couldn't show somebody, you couldn't show people in bed together. You couldn't do all, like, you couldn't show bullets going into bodies. Sure as hell couldn't show nudity. Even in the silent film era, man, you see a titty pop out here and there. It's like, see like some D.W. Griffiths or Cecil B. DeMille films and stuff. Get shown that kind of stuff, but it definitely does. There's a lot of references to Singing in the Rain, which the biggest one being, after like Manny has to leave LA because like crying and pissing himself, and the hitman that after they fucking tried to rip off Tobey Maguire, comes back in 1952. He's got a wife and a kid. Now he sells like radio and sound equipment in New York. Why that man even came back to LA is already dumb to me. By this point, because of course Jack Conrad killed himself. They found Nellie Leroy dead at 34 and all this shit. And which a lot of, I don't know, the way they just end everything is kind of lame. Some of the parallel action, specifically in that last sequence where they're dealing with the Nellie Leroy thing, and then Jack, yet again, a whole lot of shit they lifted from Paul Thomas Anderson, specifically Boogie Nights, where she just walks out into the night and we never see her again. And we get but he's back in 1952. Kinescope is still up doing his thing. He walks into a movie theater. He hadn't been in the movies in years. Goes in, it just so happens to be Singing in the Rain, which did come out in 1952 or 1951. One of those, when movies, they released movies a lot differently back then. Movies stayed in theaters a little longer than they do now because there wasn't video. There sure as hell wasn't streaming. And he's there watching Singing in the Rain. And mind you, this man lived this shit. He lived the transition from sound, or from talkies, or from silent to sound film. And they're the ones that sent him to go see the jazz singer in New York to see what, like, this is really one. And he came in like halfway into it because smitten with, runs into Nellie Leroy, and then they do their thing. Very sad moment in the film, where you can very telling moment to who that character was. And she goes to visit her mother in an insane asylum. It's just like that snake sequence is pretty fucking great too, where she's gonna get her father to wrestle a snake. Well, then he passes out because he's too drunk, and then she says, "Well, I'll do it. And I got more balls in you." And the snake ends up biting her on the neck, and then the only one that's got balls enough to save her is the fucking Lady Faye character played by Lee Jun Lee, and she's sucking it out. They end up kissing, and the little lesbian romance that has to eventually end because that's no good for the cinema. You can't. even though Hollywood was a debaucherous thing, you still couldn't do like couldn't be gay outright. That's where the lavender marriages came into play. If you don't know what a lavender marriage is, that's where like a gay man and a gay woman would marry each other just for the mere show of it, just to like make it look like they were straight and it wouldn't ruin their career, you know. And that was they did a lot of that shit at this time in Hollywood, all the way in the silent and all the way through shit to the 60s, you know, maybe in probably not so much in the or you make it look like, you know, somebody was fucking like they kept the fact that Rock Hudson was gay a secret for a long fucking time. I guess until he got AIDS, nobody knew that man was gay. And because you used to have fixers in Hollywood, and you probably still do. They just aren't as like prominent, well known. Like Eddie Mannix was one of the most well-known Hollywood fixers. That's who Josh Brolin's character in Hail Caesar is based off of. And I think it might even they might even just call him Eddie Mannix, but that's what that whole movie's based off of, because that dude, you know, anything that needed to be cleaned up, he cleaned it up, you know. And it's kind of like like I said, this in Babylon, everybody's like a composite of like 10 different people. And I throw that with Manny, gonna have him, you know, you gotta clean it up. We need somebody to wrangle Nellie Leroy and all this shit. And you know, he does a pretty good job of it until he doesn't, you know. Very interesting shit. And but that ending though, because he's in the theater and he's watching this movie, and then when it gets to that sequence, you know, he just kind of has like this breakdown, and it's like this whole like power of the cinema montage. And it's kind of fucking bullshit, because like you're seeing all of these different things and all these different film clips, and most of which most people aren't going to know unless they watch some video of somebody breaking down, well, like, well, that's 2001 A Space Odyssey, that's The Matrix. I mean, you can fucking see Avatar, because it like goes all the ages, all the different shit that you fucking see. And of course, as if we weren't being pretentious enough, we get the fucking Persona fucking thing with a kid in the hand, and you know, like, because the minute any film person references Ingmar Bergman, you know they're being pretentious as hell. This motherfucker clearly didn't know how to end this film. You see Manny just crying in the theater. This is my life on the screen. Fucking bullshit. Fucking, it's a cop out, you know, because there's a lot of great moments in this film, like that opening part. I mean, the whole bit with the elephant, brilliant. And that whole way of like they get out of the hole. Well, you got to have a permit to move an elephant. You get the car, or they get the cop. They get out of the ticket because, you know, they just invite them to, oh, we're going to this Hollywood party. That's how, like, and the thing about it is like it was a fucking like Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, they did a lot. That's part of the reason they brought William Hayes into Hollywood, was to clean that shit up, because the Fatty Arbuckle thing was the first straw. And then I forget the name of that director that was killed. And he, you know, he was a very like prominent director. He did a lot of shit, and he ended up dead. There's a murder that still went unsolved. It was a great. They wrote a book about it. It was a real great book that I read, but I forget the name of that director. And so the party and the prominent cocaine use, and you see the, you know, Margot Robbie's character especially, you know, just mountains of this shit. She's just straight taking it to the nose. But and it's weird because it's not so much the drugs that are the downfall for these people in this film. It is a change of how people can't adapt to change. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of great moments in the film. It just doesn't pack the punch that it should, you know. And the fact that the hitman lets Manny go is kind of dumb. He would have just shot that motherfucker. You know, this dude goes in guns blazing, shoots somebody that didn't even have anything to do with it, and then shoots the other guy. And you're gonna feel bad just because somebody's pissing themselves and crying. And I'm nobody. You are somebody who did, you know, should have known better. They try to fool him with movie money. Ballsy as hell. And let's see if I missed anything though. Well, it's Olivia Wilde and Catherine Waterston play two of Jack Conrad's wives in the film. And that character is interesting of itself. Brad Pitt does give like a great Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie in this film give exceptional performances. Anybody that says that Margot Robbie can't act, this might be her best performance. Like forget Barbie, forget Wolf of Wall Street and stuff. This is the thing too, like what is she gonna show now that she didn't already show in the Wolf of Wall Street? You know, so she now has to be. She already took it all off in the Wolf of Wall Street, and now this is like the most stripped down performance that she's ever done. And of course, Brad Pitt is absolutely brilliant in the film too. Like it's very devastating when you kind of see his fall from grace, especially when his best friend kills himself over some chick, Lucas Haas, who plays George Munt. And we see the whole film, he's always trying to like lift this guy up because you know, everywhere you turn around, you know, this dude's just fucking up some way. And like mentioned all those other ones. But it's crazy. Hollywood is a fucking mess. And Babylon does portray that very well, you know, and a lot of times it is a little sporadic, but especially like, you know, that whole sequence of the assembly line of the silent film stuff, as well as them trying to do sound for the first time. That whole like you really feel the tension, and the cameraman dies because it's so hot in that box that he ends up having a fucking heart attack. It's just fucking crazy. And it's a lot of people have died for the cinema, you know, and it's like a lot of people can't deal with death in that industry, and they usually end up killing themselves, ironically enough, either, you know, with a gun or with drugs or alcohol. They end up just ruining what could have been, because that was the weird thing with Brad Pitt's character Jack Conrad, because he had finally gotten back into movies, and I guess he couldn't cope with playing the older gentleman in films. That's another thing that actors can't really deal with. They don't want to deal with getting old, which, you know, you can give your best performances at a later age. Look at Edward G. Robinson, Double Indemnity. Like he's outshining all them motherfuckers, and he's not even the lead. So I mean, that vanity is a real killer. The music is extraordinary in this film too. That's another thing not be discounted. But is this a great movie though? If you know the history behind it, you're gonna pick up on a lot of shit. If you don't, you're gonna think this movie's just bullshit. And which is not. It's maybe half bullshit. You know, like I said, they ripped off a lot from Boogie Nights. Not to say that like Paul Thomas Anderson was the first one to do tracking shots. Far from it. Because even like Paul Thomas Anderson gets a lot of inspiration from directors like Kubrick, Altman, Scorsese, and Max Ophuls. But Paul Thomas Anderson is enough of an auteur to make that shit his own. Yeah, sure, the ending of Boogie Nights is a direct reference to the ending of Raging Bull. But he ain't sitting there reading fucking On the Waterfront. He ain't reading on the he's reading the fucking script that he's about to go do for the porno flick. And there's a few other minor references, but it's so overt in Babylon that it's almost a slap in the face. And of course the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood parallels can't be denied either, because there's that whole dynamic too. The only difference is you got Brad Pitt playing the sensitive actor now, and you got Margot Robbie's just this wild, crazy, out of control. Very much similar to Dirk Diggler. The only difference is like Dirk Diggler at least started out innocent in the film in Boogie Nights. Nellie Leroy, not innocent at all. She's immediately like drunk and out of control, like hitting concrete pillars, and immediately as where can I get drugs, And that was another thing too, like the amount of like you always could get drugs on a Hollywood set. You see the little open peanut and it's got the fucking pills in it and shit. And you got to keep these actors medicated, I suppose, to keep them doing whatever, keep them going. And like, it's just fucking nuts. All the performances are great though. Like Diego Calva's really good, and Gene Smart and Jovan Adepo, probably mispronouncing that name, and Lee Jun Lee. There's not a bad performance in even the supporting actors and everything. And it is an interesting film to like pick apart all the shit from film history. Like I said, the Fatty Arbuckle thing. And I just think it ends so fucking weak, because it's like, film people, including myself, sucker for a great montage. But it didn't feel like it's supposed to be from the perspective of Manny. It's such a pretentious, artsy thing where it's like we say all the whole history of cinema from past, present, and future. It just doesn't hit the way I think Chazelle thought it was going to hit. And surprisingly, this movie didn't really set the Oscars or anything on fire. It seems to me like anything that's like really about film does not get the appreciation it should deserve. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood being another one, because both those films that they deal with that two of the biggest transitional periods in Hollywood, and they do it so perfectly, because of course there's a lot of composites from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well, and mind you, we'll get into like I may just do the first few about movies about Hollywood, Babylon being the first, because I've noticed a lot of people talking about this movie and in a way that's like, they're praising it when they didn't really praise it when it came out. And I was a big proponent of this film when it first came out. And the more I think about it, the more I was like, it's not really that fucking brilliant. Anybody can watch Boogie Nights 100 times and it's like, let's just apply this to the silent film era, the transition of talking pictures, and it's, and I will say this, it didn't stay hung up so much on the voice shit as something like Singing in the Rain. It was like, it was all about it. Fucking musicals and shit. Musicals are fucking trash anyways, but that was what people wanted. at that time, because like most of your movies of that era were music. Because back, people forget Hollywood's a fucking business. It's called the movie business for a reason. You want to make money with. And most of the people that went to the movies were women and gay men. So what did you get? Fucking musicals. And because of course, what was the first talking picture? A fucking musical. And the jazz singer is lame as hell. I mean, in my opinion, the Neil Diamond one is way better than the Al Jolson shit. And there wasn't costume dramas and shit. Don't forget Bauhaus, fucking Bauhaus and shit. And the filming of that the battle sequences in Babylon, that whole when they're all out at the fucking Spike Jones playing that Austrian filmmaker, that shit's real brilliant because it shows just how reckless and wild and unregulated it was. Because like the extras that are striking, they want to renegotiate their pay. They're all junkies from Skid Row. And Manny's having to break that up, and he just starts shooting at him while he's riding a horse. You know, that shit, I mean, I can't sit here and list like actual instances where that happened, but I'm pretty sure something like that fucking happened. Maybe everything in this movie happened at one point, more than fucking likely. It all comes from somewhere. Because like the wild stories in Hollywood are fucking endless. I doubt that they've all been told yet. There's still a bunch of shit out there that people probably gonna, still to this day be talking about. And like there's still so much more to uncover because they were good at hiding shit. And you kind of had to, especially when you had leeches like Gene Smart's character, who's literally at that party in the beginning of the film trying to expose whoever's fucking party that was. Was that where he keeps his young girls and all that stuff? It's Hollywood's always been fucked up. Why people that are surprised when the scandal breaks is like, it's the way it is. These are broken human beings. Actors, filmmakers are some of the worst kind of people. Why they're in this fucking business. They spend their whole lives trying to be somebody else and trying to create a world that doesn't exist because they can't deal with the one that they're in. Pretty fucking pathetic when you think about it. And I will say this. I do think Damien Chazelle definitely captures the patheticness of the Dream Factory. Because the funny thing about the Dream Factory is it's one big fucking nightmare. And that's why like the movie does like not get progressively worse in the sense that it's shitty, but it gets progressively worse for each character. But one good thing happens, 10 bad things happen. And that descent into hell is a perfect metaphor for the shit these motherfuckers were going through in this film. And it's definitely a wild ride. I will say watch Babylon because it let me know if you disagree with anything that I've said. It's a wild ride. Great performances. I don't think Damien Chazelle is that good of a filmmaker, but he does have sequences in this film that are beyond brilliant. Like that party sequence, I will say, like Fellini on his best day could not do some shit like that. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to that shit. That's another thing too, directly from Boogie Nights, when that chick ODs, Fatty Arbuckle, they're all trying to get her out, find a way to get her out without you know, ruining the party and stuff. Yet again, may even do one on Boogie Nights. As much as I've said this, Babylon ripped off Boogie Nights. We'll see what Boogie Nights ripped off. Probably not as much as Babylon, because Babylon, like I said, it's half a great movie. Because I can't really praise something that reminds me of 10 other movies that are way better than it. Now, maybe not 10, under 2 at least. Babylon and Boogie Nights and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You watch, we compare them. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll admit it, but I'm not. You motherfuckers can't prove that shit because the proof is in the pudding. Babylon is not an original movie. Maybe an original approach, but like I said, if this motherfucker hadn't watched Boogie Nights 100 times, I don't think he could have made this movie. And like I said, it's my opinion. Prove it wrong. I don't care. But this has been real ass cinema from a real ass cover. So stay tuned next week, do it same time, Thursday, 2 p.m. I don't know what movie I'm going to do. It's a surprise. If you got any movie that you want torn apart or, you know, or praise or anything you think is overrated or underrated, let me know. I'll go watch it again. Or if I haven't seen it, I'll watch it. And then I'll rip it apart. 2 p.m. on Thursday, where you can find real ass cinema on real ass YouTube. This has been Ethan Griggs.